For those of you who are taking Thesis Seminar, I wanted to spend a few minutes here recapping week 10. As a reminder, the last day to collect data is April 16th, 2025. And also that day, we will be meeting as a whole group to discuss different strategies for analyzing the data that you've collected. At this point, your participants and instruments and procedure section should be completed. We'll develop the data analysis during break. So again, when we meet on April 16th, I'll give you strategies so that you'll have some ideas about how you can analyze your data throughout the break before we come back on May 5th. Remember to complete your reflection for week 11. And also remember that make sure that you're collecting data from a variety of sources, primarily documents, recorded interviews, and recorded classroom observations. So the methods section at this point, make sure that you've completed your participant section. This should be one paragraph, roughly 150 to 175 words. I've included some guiding questions that you can consider when you're completing this paragraph. But essentially, you're describing your participants as it relates to your research questions, as it relates to the purpose of your study. So it's not necessary to include information about age, gender, etc., unless you plan to compare and contrast if that is of interest, where you're checking maybe a teacher or comparing a teacher at a certain age or with a certain level of experience with another teacher. If you're actually concerned about comparing genders among your participants, then of course, yes, you will include this information in your participant section. But if you're not interested, if it's not relevant to answer your research questions, then this information will not be included in your methods section. You also want to include the reason why you chose your participants, the rationale, and include any permissions that you got to collect your data. Most of you will have an informed consent form that you considered for your teachers in particular. If you had an informed consent form signed by other participants, say students, then you'll also need to mention it and reference it in your participant subsection. So you'll mention what the informed consent form consists of very generally, and you'll say see Appendix A, where you should have the instrument in the appendices section, maybe in the very first instrument that you mention, in fact, probably will be the informed consent form. So Appendix A will be your first instrument. And remember that instruments are should be in blank form. So they won't be completed. They won't include the participant's name. In fact, in this same section, you'll probably mention that you're using pseudonyms to protect the confidentiality of the participants. And of course, we want to avoid any names of schools as well. In the second subsection called Instruments and Procedure, this will be another paragraph between 150 to 175 words, again, describing the process that you follow to collect the data. So in this particular paragraph, you're probably going to organize your information chronologically. So first, you applied this instrument. You can describe the instrument, maybe state the purpose of that instrument, and then move on to the next instrument or the next type of data that you collected. So it's going to be a combination of describing the instruments and describing the way that you collected the data. Think of it as if someone were to replicate your study. Let's say they wanted to repeat your own study. What would you include in this paragraph so that they could repeat your study with their own chosen participants? So at this point, we need to have completed these first two subsections, the participants and the instruments and procedure sections. Now, the data analysis will be our third subsection for the methods section. Again, one paragraph, approximately 150 to 175 words. And we'll include information about how you went about analyzing the data. This, again, will be our focus on April 16th. So The data analysis, I'm going to hold off until taking a look at it probably when we come back on May 5th to give you a chance to fully get into the data analysis, as you have now collected most, if not all, of your data. One other thing I wanted to, actually two other things I wanted to share with you also is to draw your attention back to the Notebook LM that I shared with all of you a couple of weeks ago. Over the next couple of days, I'm going to be adding a note on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen in this area here that's going to be called a study guide. And this is going to be a study guide to help you become a little bit more familiar or just simply review your literature review once again. I think it's a good idea at this point to revisit the literature review to make sure that we're very clear on the key terms that we included, that we're not neglecting any ideas that we have in our lit review, in our theoretical framework as it relates to the data that you're collecting and later we'll analyze. So we'll be looking at that. I would like to talk about this study guide or some of the key points in your literature review during our tutoring sessions during week 11. During week 10, we also talked about looking at keywords taken from your literature review, again, as a way to revisit the literature review to see if there's anything that we need to review, either modify, take out, or add as it relates to now some of the data that you've been collecting up to this point. So take a look at the keywords. Also consider any keywords that perhaps are being used interchangeably that maybe we need to be more consistent in using, or maybe just taking a look at certain keywords to make sure that you can offer definitions if asked. That's something else that we'll be taking a look at during week 11 as well, some of the keywords. Again, just making sure that at the end of the day that our literature review ends up aligning with the focus of your own particular study. That is the data that you're collecting, the data that you're going to be analyzing, and later the data that you will present in an organized way as your findings or as your results and discussion. In your Notebook LM, I did include, if you check one of these notes, some ideas about how you can think about organizing some of your findings. At this point, it might be a little bit too early to be really too concerned with the order of how you're going to be presenting your results. But I do think it's a good idea to look at the options, to be thinking ahead about what different ways that you will be presenting some of your findings. As you are getting into your data analysis, some of these ideas will start to make sense when you ultimately will need to start organizing these ideas in a way that you're presenting to your target audience. So I think we'll stop there for today. Make sure you're reaching out to me if anything comes up during week 11, any challenges, any surprises that you're not sure how to contend with, or maybe you're having some questions about how to proceed. Make sure you're reaching out before our next tutoring session so we can address those challenges. Otherwise, I'll see everybody in our next tutoring session.